Welcome to this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event recorded live at the Association of Independent Crop Consultants Conference in Northamptonshire on the 14th of January 2026. We hope you enjoy the listen. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year if it's not already too late to say so, and a warm welcome to our Farmers Weekly Question Time here at the 2026 AICC Conference. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. The Association of Independent Crop Consultants delivers commercially independent advice to growers across about 50% of the UK arable advice market. And with that in mind, our panel of 5 experts who are going to be answering your questions this afternoon. On my immediate right, Baroness Minette Batters is a farmer, a crossbench peer, author of the government's Independent Farming Profitability Review, and a former NFU president. Next to Minette, we have Ollie Fletcher, a Leicestershire farmer, historian and host of the Farming Explained YouTube channel. Next to Ollie, we have Andrew Blasey, who will be known to you all, chairman of the AICC and a partner at Prime Agriculture. On my immediate left, third generation Yorkshire farmer Paul Temple, chairman of the Global Farmer Network and a board member of the Science for Sustainable Agriculture think tank. And last but by no means least, we have Jenny Brunton, a senior European policy advisor at the British Agriculture Bureau in Brussels, representing the 4 UK farming unions. Jenny also represents the World Farming Organization in COP climate change negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give our panel a warm AICC welcome. So the first question, Scott Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, Scott Martin, agronomist in Suffolk. So my question was, being sort of in an almost exclusively arable area, the current state of arable profitability is quite concerning. Did a panel see the future for our sort of area in diversifying farm businesses, i.e. potentially maybe a return to mixed farming or that sort of thing, or diversifying businesses away from farming, or do we just keep hoping that it'll all sort itself out?
Thank you very much, Scott. So in relation to arable profitability, I'm going to go to Minette with this question. Minette, do you see the future as diversifying the farm business, as Scott suggests, perhaps mixed farming, or diversifying away from farming, or just keep hoping that things will sort themselves out?
Scott, well, it's sort of the key question, really, at the moment. And when I was asked to do this review, Steve Reed was very keen that I look at diversification as well. And I was equally adamant that I wouldn't, because what I really worried about was that the recommendation would come out saying, well, you're better off diversifying, to your point. We want farming to be profitable, and that is what I focused on. There isn't time for me to sort of cover off everything in this area, but I think some interesting things came out of it. One, DEFRA aggregates all its figures. So they haven't been coming up with really honest analysis about where the industry is at year by year. And that makes quite a considerable difference. So we broke all that data down, and it was also, in the industry, very keen to tell me, the top performing farmers are the bulk of the output. That's not the case. The mid-performing farmer is 65% of output and farming 57% of land area. And they're vulnerable. And particularly when we look at the arable sector, those that are top performing that stay there for 5 years in a row, only 8% do. And the other thing I'd say on that is 2 critical factors. You can have a great business, but you won't be profitable unless you have the scale within that business. So it's not just as simple as that we can sort it out easily. And the Treasury were very keen to challenge me on inefficient businesses. We have got some inefficient businesses, but we've also got some really, really efficient businesses. But that scale point is key. Which is why I've made the case that we have to change this. We need an SFI that is all England. We need an SFI that invests in every hectare. It would be an absolute travesty if we go down the route of saying, well, we just want to look after the small farms. We must invest in every hectare. That doesn't mean to say things can't be tapered, but we need to invest in every hectare. We need to bring in food-producing crops that deliver a nature benefit, that deliver a soil benefit. And we can do that. And we need to prioritise within the SFI the active farmer principle. So that the number of people that were saying to me, well, it was great because we made our estate look a lot nicer on the back of it. That is not what this is about. And in the beginning, the real focus was on actually large landowners not pulling down huge sums of money to make their estate look pretty. So it's got to get back to the business of production. In the geopolitical climate that we have now, we absolutely need a viable, profitable, thriving arable sector. Which is why I've made the case that I have for the arable sector. But if we think it can be business as usual, we're going to regret it. And we have to embrace wholesale change.
Thank you. Thanks, Minette. Andrew Blasey, would you like to comment on the profitability or the lack of profitability at the moment, the challenging economics around arable farming and what we should do?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging at the moment, Johan. It really is. Our members are working out on the coalface, advising clients, which I think, firstly and foremostly, I just praise what a fantastic job they do, because they are on the coalface with these farmers who are challenged for profitability, offering, professional, independent, impartial advice, which I believe is key to getting them there and getting them profitable. But one of the things I think we all believe in is actually all my colleagues are trained in producing sustainable, nutritious food and actually ensuring it's profitable and sustainable on farm for them to do that. And actually, if you start to muddy the waters by bringing in other schemes potentially that actually reduce the profitability of every hectare, then that starts to get tricky, to be honest, because I actually believe that the phrase I believe is sustainable intensification. That's important because you look at other parts of the world that are producing less food than us. I think it's important that we maintain the level of production on farm at the highest possible level to produce as much from the good soils and good land that we have. Important to be sustainable. So we've got to drive to that position at the moment. And it does concern me at the moment, Johan, that actually probably some of the policies and things that are in place are actually looking perhaps towards reducing production by area because of incentives to do that. I know the incentives are there for biodiversity reasons and so forth, and good things, but actually I think, the two perhaps shouldn't always be looked at overlapping each other. They should perhaps be looked at side by side.
Yeah.
The AICC has been at the forefront of integrated pest management. For years we've been going on about it. My predecessors have. We are there, we know what it's about. We do find it a bit challenging perhaps when we're told to up our game on IPM, and perhaps research, related to IPM isn't currently there at the moment. And we're doing all we can, and we always do all we can because, as I say, the independence in us actually means that actually we want to do the right thing, and actually to be told that you need to up your game with IPM when there's insufficient research to enable us to do that is quite frustrating as well. So I'm a great believer. I think that sustainability and biodiversity to go together, but there's got to be with intensification and two working side by side, I believe.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Scott, what are you telling your clients in terms of explaining the options and the lack of margin and trying to give them, I guess, some hope where there is hope?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I was looking at this last week, and gross margins now are not wildly different to what they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. A 10-ton wheat crop, if you're able to achieve 10-ton, is something like 1,100 quid maybe gross margin. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is the massively increased fixed costs and the massively reduced BPS. I think taking Nick's figures, 2019 they had whole farm fixed costs, well the difference, between 2019 for whole farm fixed costs to now is about 200 quid a hectare. So if you take 200 quid a hectare BPS off that, then you're 400 quid a hectare worse off before you start than you were 6 or 7 years ago. So tinkering around with variable costs and gross margins just doesn't cut it.
Yeah, thank you. Would anybody else on the panel like to comment on this? Paul?
The only thing is to give a different sense of perspective. This is probably one of the most exciting periods of farm management you will actually have. And I think we need to challenge ourselves as an industry as to how good we are at managing time and how good we are at managing capital. And we were taught these skills back in college, and have we as an industry applied them, as well as our competitors in North America and South America? And so you would see in the screen earlier this morning, poultry sector was running green, pig sector is adding value to cereals. There are opportunities out there, but it requires a sense of genuine industry management.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to go to the next question. These are two questions. They were similar. I think we'll take them together. So I'm going to ask Chloe Francis to ask her question, and then when Chloe has finished, Stuart Sinclair, if you could ask your question.
Thank you. Yes, so Chloe Francis, a research scientist from Herefordshire. And I asked, knowledge of the agricultural industry among the general public is pretty low, often driven by misinformation on social media. How can we change this to raise the profile of British food production and the work that we are doing to ensure British produced food has a high welfare status and minimises impact on the environment?
Thanks, Chloe. So what can we do to raise the profile of British food production and its high welfare status and low environmental impact? And Stuart Sinclair,
Yeah, hi, Stuart Sinclair from Hampshire Arable Systems. My question again is about attitude, where we live in a country with no real food culture and people don't really want to spend money on food. They'd rather be spending it on iPhones and Netflix subscriptions. And when we see prices actually going up to where I think most of us would agree they should be, like in 2022, it was actually labelled as a kind of a cost of living crisis. So, my eyes, there needs to be something done to change people's attitude and appreciation of food. I was wondering if there is actually any way you can see that happening.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. So what can we do to give people more appreciation of food in a world where, I guess people would rather spend money, or some people would rather spend money on iPhones and Netflix. Ollie, I'm going to ask you this question as somebody who, you have a successful YouTube channel explaining farming to people. How do we gain greater appreciation of food in terms of its high welfare status and the work that goes into it?
Well, I think it's fundamentally just storytelling. I mean, while I was at university a few years ago, I did notice that since Clarkson's Farm, lots of people were suddenly like, oh, actually, agriculture is complicated and it's scientific and it's interesting and there's all of these different variables that play off against each other, and they wanted to know more about it. And the problem is that there isn't really a kind of simultaneously accessible and high-level platform for them to learn about it, which is what I've sort of tried to create with varying success. It is similar to campaigning, though. I think we're a very urban country. We urbanised before anywhere else in the world. So people in this country are so unbelievably removed from traditional food culture. I think it would be optimistic to expect that to be recreated. But what we can do is sort of use clever campaigning tricks to sort of get into a situation where that doesn't really matter. So with things like chlorinated chicken, you'll probably remember from the Conservative government trying to get a free trade agreement with America, right? The public really respond to that because it's about food standards and health. They go, we don't want chlorinated chicken, this discusses, etc., etc. If they were to have chlorinated chicken in the shops, it would be cheap and they would almost certainly buy it. But what you can do is you can exploit the fact that they say they don't want it to get political leverage within good storytelling, hopefully, and then we can cement the place of British produced food that's high quality in the national psyche. So storytelling.
Thank you. Minette, you've successfully, during your time as NFU president, managed to, I guess, cross that bridge or build bridges with the general public in terms of explaining what farming does, what farmers and food producers do in a way that the public can understand. It's not an easy thing to do, to get across that message, especially when we're all involved in it as a career to various stages, but also very emotionally attached to it as well. I mean, how do we get that appreciation of, or increase the appreciation of food?
I thought Jack Bobo summed it up really well at the Oxford Farming Conference when he said, consumers have never cared more or known less. So that's a really, really bad combination. You know, they care passionately, but they know nothing. And the two don't go well together. But look, I actually think the general public are really, really supportive of farming. I mean, all the polling that is out there, you know, as occupations that are valued, nurses first, farming second. I mean, that's really, really good. You know, when you look at, you know, the role of doctors, politicians, right down there. I mean, farming in the eyes of the public is in a really good place. I think the issues, and through the review, I looked at other countries, and Paul and I were discussing at the beginning, you know, no farmer anywhere in the world is living in the land of milk and honey. No one is saying, God, it's great here, it's just brilliant. So we all share many of the same challenges, but where it is working better than in other places is when those countries are working in partnership with their farmers. And that's what I think we have got to get far more to. We've got a civil service that has never been more out of touch with rural, with farming. They are terrifyingly out of touch. So I'm not concerned about the public at all. I think they're on board. I'm really concerned about where the machinery of government is. Because I tell you what, it wouldn't matter which party was in power, you would have the same problem. And it's not an easy thing to sort out. Our machinery of government, 20 departments, is a product of the European Union. It's a product since 1973 when we joined the common market, and it has grown like topsy. So it will radically need to be reformed at some stage. And that is really the change that is needed. I think we've got 70 million people on an island. I think farming's in a really good place, but consumers are powerless. They can do nothing about the price of food. Price of food is the price of food. That's controlled by the major retailers. They can't do anything about that. Tesco's, I spoke at their conference the other day, Tesco's said they have never, ever had, through their surveying, such a high response from consumers wanting to buy British. Record. So that shows you, people want to buy British. They're with us. We just got to make sure that the rest of it works.
Do you think, Minette, we need to be more positive as an industry in terms of explaining what we do?
When I did this and I went out and asked everybody, and I've learnt now, and I don't think I'll ever want to do it again, you go out and you ask everybody, okay, what's wrong? Be prepared. Because I was drowning in what was wrong from everybody. And did they unite on solutions? Absolutely not. If I had submitted all the solutions, I would have put probably 500 asks forward. So the industry is not only is it not united, it's not united in what it wants. And so if you are the government of the day, you are subject to these asks all the time, but they're all in different places, which is why I've tried to bring everything together to say, well, actually, we've got to look at the how. We can't keep asking for everything. And it's complicated and it's different sector by sector. But all I can say is at the end, I was much more excited than at the beginning. And if we can change the culture and we can change the relationship, I think we're in a really good place.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. Steve Cook.
Steve Cook, Hampshire Arable Systems. Can any proposed trade deal really help UK agriculture, or do they just open us up to cheap imports?
Thank you very much, Steve. So can any proposed trade deal really help UK agriculture, or do they just open us up to cheap imports? So I'm going to go to this side of the panel. I'm going to ask Paul. I'm going to ask Paul, and then I'm going to ask Jenny, because I've got some really good questions also lined up for Jenny to answer first in a moment. But Paul.
Of course they do. It was patently obvious when we voted for Brexit that if you followed the logic of this through, we would have our markets opened up in a way that we wouldn't when we were part of the European Union. And we should have taken that into a calculation from that point on, that Europe is not part of our competition in the same way as America, South and North, will be competition, and as we've seen from both Australia and New Zealand. And so it is for us to factor that in. And I am reminded of a Brazilian lady senator who farmed when I was in Brasilia with her, and she was having no complaining from a European farmer. She said, "I am 4,000 miles from your market. You are a net food importer. If you can't beat me, you aren't very good." And I think it was a wonderful challenge to make you think, how good am I?
Thank you, Paul. Jenny?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think on Paul's point, how do we compete? And that is really the problem that we're having with trade deals. And from my perspective and where we are in Brussels, you know, and I've been there now for 5 years, and really sort of from Brexit onwards, seeing, you know, perhaps farmers in the UK looking at Australia, at America, and thinking that we're in any way similar. I mean, it's mad. The most similar farming that we have are our neighbours in Europe, who are our biggest trading partners. And at the moment, we're in the trenches of negotiations between the EU and the UK to extend on what we already have through the TCA with an SPS, so a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, where essentially we will be aligning on all plant and animal health rules with the EU. Basically the situation that Northern Ireland is currently in. This will mean free trade. We'll reduce all the kind of checks that we currently have between the UK and the EU and make trade with our biggest trading partner much easier. But it is going to mean that we don't have the control that many people voted for when they voted for Brexit in those decisions, which in this room, critically for plant health, are seen as areas where there is great opportunity. So it's balancing up that risk of losing control with access to markets, and also really being realistic about who are your competitors and where can you compete.
Thank you. This is a huge topic, this one, and it touches on a number of other questions that people have asked, and there is going to be some overlap here, but I'm going to keep this one going for a little bit. Ollie, can any proposed trade deal really help UK agriculture, or do they just open us up to cheap imports? I mean, trade can be good or bad, right?
Well, I think alignment with Europe could protect us from the global free market, which would probably be a good thing. I think that the potential for cheap imported food from places, well, the former colonies, America, Australia, New Zealand, these sorts of places, is a very central part of the sort of political consensus on the food system. So we have had socialised agriculture since the Second World War, but now they want to feed us with cheap imports, which saves the taxpayer money and farm support for us. It should save the consumer money because the food will be cheaper. So in this system where we're fed from abroad, you don't need farmers on the land, so you can tax them off it and do something else with it that gets growth, which is the purpose of the inheritance tax. And this is, I think, sort of the problem with how the industry has mobilised over the past year. We've been very focused on the inheritance tax, which was a very pernicious, cruel thing. But the bigger picture is that the government are able to try and turf us off the land because they intend to rely on other people to feed the British public. So, in my view, trying to stop these free trade agreements is singularly the most important thing that we could do if we want to preserve the countryside as it has been known, which perhaps we don't want to do, and other members of the panel might have differing views on that. But I think that they're the number one enemy, these free trade agreements. We need to attack them, and then if we do successfully stop them, the government is going to have to rely on British farmers to feed the British public. They're going to have to come up with a food plan. The inheritance tax won't make any sense, and they'll have to actually support us to do what we do. So I think free trade agreements are very much a bad thing.
Minette, Steve's question mentioned, can any proposed trade deal help UK agriculture, or do they just open us up to cheap imports? What are your thoughts?
Well, they could if we were remotely any good at doing trade deals. But we're not. We're absolutely bloody useless at them. And I'd love to think that Ollie's world could happen, but it's not going to change. So we are going to be negotiating trade deals. Agriculture doesn't matter very much. I hope my recommendations will change that, but at the moment it couldn't matter less because it's 0.6% of GDP. So it couldn't matter less, and they're quite happy to crack on, negotiate these trade deals. Look, alignment with the EU will help a bit, but we're talking about SPS. We are talking about food safety. We are not talking about food values. Food values is where the cost lies. That is environmental protection and animal welfare. And we're continuing to raise the standards. Don't forget, we've already raised the standards on environment and animal welfare above the European Union. And that's in legislation. And that's the issue. So all this claptrap about we're protecting our farmers in trade deals is rubbish, because we're talking about food safety. We've done a deal with India, for God's sake. They are going to be SPS compliant in the next decade, I can tell you, because they want access to 70 million people on an island. So trade is trade, and we ain't going to change that much. And we also have DBT, Department of Business and Trade, that deals with trade. They don't deal with farmers. So we need DEFRA to be an economic department that is focused on trade and has a plan for trade. Now, the critical point is managing supply and demand. Why are beef prices where they are? Because the beef herd is contracting and beef prices are continuing to rise. Why is the lamb price where it is? Because the halal market is growing and the export market is growing. Those are the only reasons why the prices are where they are. So if we can manage supply and demand better, why did milk price plummet? Because we produced more milk than any other country in Europe. So we've absolutely got to be focused on market monitoring. We've got to know what is coming in, what is going out, and we've really got to balance that supply and demand across retail, out of home, procurement and exports. We need to be exporting much more. We've been lazy exporters and we've got to get much more out. But if we're going to do that, we've got to know the flows, particularly on the oilseeds and cereal side. What's coming in? Where's it going? What needs to go out? What can we do in these areas? So supply and demand is where we've got to focus on, because we're not going to make this core standards work. We're not going to change these trade deals. I think we're going to keep negotiating them, and we're going to keep bringing more in. If we bring more in, we've got to get more out. And, you know, there's other sectors where we can see how, you all know, everybody in this room knows supply and demand is critical. And that is the point when you're dealing with commodity markets. You've got to be able to manage that supply and demand.
Minette, thank you. Steve, are you happy with that answer? What do you think yourself?
I'm as happy as I can be with that answer, because it's what the government does is the problem, not what we think. I'd like to see anything brought in to match our standards. And probably some areas of agriculture in other parts of the world are supported. We're not now. And that gives an unlevel playing field. So I'd like to see a level playing field. Going back to what Stuart said earlier, I'd like to see people respect the food that comes from Britain and just buy British.
Thank you. Thanks.
Just one point on that.
Paul.
We haven't even got a level playing field in the UK. We've split it into 4 regions. And, you know, it's always worth asking somebody who's looking in on the UK what their view is on this. There are harsh realities. Minette's touched on all of it. There isn't going to be protection. There isn't the means to manage markets. It's the willingness to look longer term, into longer cycles, and buy into dedicated supply chains, whether you like them or not. And this will be about risk management. And the thing about risk management is you might not get the highs, but you have a consistent business for 5 to 10 years. And when we have the wonderful retailers, although Minette might dispute that on occasions, but the wonderful retailers and the food processing and service sector that we have, we are incredibly lucky in this country.
You touched on, we're going to cover this one in a minute. This is the divergence of ag policy between the devolved nations. But Luke Cotton, are you here? Is Luke here?
Yeah, hello. Luke Cotton, Oxfordshire. Is there a danger that dynamic alignment might slip through by default because it's complex and politically convenient for Labour, and that neither government nor the farming press has adequately challenged what this really means for UK winter cropping.
Thank you, Luke. And dynamic alignment is essentially the UK accepting European rules as they evolve and change. So we abide by their rules, but because we're no longer part of Europe, we don't have any say in what those rules are. We don't have a vote. Jenny, if you could address this, Luke's point about is there a danger that dynamic alignment might slip through? Where are we with dynamic alignment and the UK government?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think there's a danger of it slipping through. I think it's already slipped. It was announced last year when the EU and UK had their big announcement of a common understanding, and in that agreement, the UK government said they will dynamically align with the EU on all plant and animal health and welfare rules. So this is happening. It's not a case of when and how. It's currently happening. And what is being negotiated is not how much or how little. It's a case of timelines or potential exemptions. We, as the UK farming unions, have been working very hard on this for the last year. It's something that we knew was going to be happening. The EU are hard negotiators, and we saw that in Brexit when some of the best UK negotiators worked for the EU. We were ingrained in that system, and so we know exactly what they expect from a dynamic alignment deal, and it would be naive to think that we're going to have some sort of special consideration, particularly when there's been a real lack of trust between the EU and the UK governments over the last 5 years with how Brexit has been handled, and sort of broken promises made. So I think from us, it is happening, and it's a case of managing expectations on how it happens and how quickly it happens. And in terms of the question on having a voice within the EU, some would say it doesn't matter that we don't have a vote. For some things that could be quite critical, particularly in a SCOPAF committee when they're reapproving a substance. But a huge part of that is how we feed in before it. So pre-Brexit, the UK was undertaking about 40% of reauthorisations of active substances. We were doing a huge bulk of the EU's work. Not only have they had to fill that backlog since we left and have a huge backlog of products still to assess, but we obviously in the UK haven't managed to keep on top of approvals as well, and we keep on seeing the rollover of substances. Something that would be key for us would be having the UK back in as a rapporteur and being able to assess substances again. And I know in the EU, they valued the UK. We were seen as pragmatic, science-based, fact-based, and they appreciate that, particularly when some member states are a bit more political, shall we say. So I think for us, it's about having integrity, and we will be in the rooms in negotiations, or for example, if a product is being discussed in a SCOPAF meeting, we will be in that room. It's about the UK government making sure that they have the right people there who are properly prepared and knowledgeable, but also respected and have relationships with the other countries. We can't just rock up and bang our fists on the table and expect to get our own way. It's we call it in Brussels now, we have a lot of soft lobbying, where you have to be nice and take people for a coffee, and we have to show a certain level of integrity in those discussions, that we are coming in with science and facts, and working with partners like the Irish, for example, on certain plant health questions. And for us, that's where it's going to be important, because we aren't going to have a vote, so we have to work in those avenues instead to make sure that our opinions are heard. But we do have allies in Europe, and Irish farmers are always keen to know what's happening here, and we face many of the same problems. And I'd also just add that I do think Europe understands farming, and in terms of a dynamic agreement implementation, I know there's been concerns about grain in sheds having to be destroyed because it's had product used, or sort of there being an overnight where new rules come in. I don't think that will be the case. If a product has been used Legally, at the time of use, as long as it meets MRL requirements for trade, it's perfectly fine. And I would expect at minimum there to be some sort of sale by and use by on products which are not authorised in the EU, which are in the UK when this agreement comes into force.
Thanks, Jenny. Andrew Blasey, huge implications for the world of agronomy, plant protection products, etc.
Absolutely, Johan. I think, firstly, going right back to the start, I think, being involved in some discussions on dynamic alignment to date representing AICC is plainly obvious, I think, and talking to the farmers we advise, it's plainly obvious the boat has sailed, I think, to a certain extent. And the communication message didn't go out that the boat was sailing. The farmers do not know about dynamic alignment in general. I would say the vast majority are unaware, which is, it is so actually, our policymakers have a problem there, essentially. I slightly disagree with Jenny in that actually I think in these conversations it become plainly aware to me that actually they don't know that actually there's crops in the ground that could potentially already be affected. I don't think they all DEFRA realise that on the whole, talking to them. Wheat sown now could be implicated in this, in June, July, August sales 27 potentially, depending on timelines and timeframes. I know we've got to wait and see that. But actually coming down to the technical side, which is what all my colleagues and advisors here are worried about, there are massive implications as well for the plant protection products we use and approval. Back in pre-Brexit days, we had CRD, and at that time, CRD was actually admired by Europe. It's the body they look to for regulatory work to actually approve products, reapprove products when they came up for renewal. Is held in esteem by the rest of Europe. Is that going to be the case when we get to dynamic alignment? The products, we talked about active ingredients such as synmethylin, new products that have been approved since we left the EU, that are not yet available in Europe. We have product like flufenicet, which is up for renewal in the EU and is going to be revoked in the EU. What's going to happen to that in the UK? Are they going to accept what CRD say about flufenicet? Are they going to accept CRD's approval of synmethylin? The two go hand in hand. The actives are reliant on each other. But if you bring that into big numbers, blackgrass is massive. Potentially, blackgrass could have multi-million, hundreds of £1 million worth of potential cost to the industry if it got out of control. If we can't keep the magic 98% control through choosing our rotations, changing seed rate, drilling date, doing all the cultural things, but actually getting that last 1 or 2% from actual chemical control, from vital active ingredients we need, then we could be in a proper muddle. And then that follows on and cycles on further in that we actually being encouraged to have policy where we're moving away from ploughs, introducing cover crops. We already have concerns perhaps, about the future of glyphosate and how we're going to be able to use it. Actually, 2 active ingredients, one being revoked, one approved, in a simple case of dynamic alignment could have massive consequences in actual farming policy, the rotations, what we're trying to achieve with cover crops and actually mopping up nitrates, phosphates, things like that. It's a massive, massive picture, Johan, that's very concerning and has caused a lot of debate over here in this room over the last 2 days.
But because it is a big subject, I'm going to go to Paul, then Minette, then to Ollie on this. But Paul, what are your thoughts on dynamic alignment?
To my mind, it's a huge retrograde step because one of the reasons for Brexit was this supposed taking back control, and effectively Jenny's explained the complexity of this, and we are still involved, but when it gets into the political sphere of Labour, Reform and the Conservatives, it'll be bounced around in a way that nobody will understand it. All it does is it loses the flexibility to speed up our approvals process to fully apply the benefits from the gene editing bill. And that, I think, is a huge concern. And in many ways, it shows how slow we have been to take the advantage of setting our own legislative framework. And it's just entirely down to us. The dynamics that comes with the ability to use gene editing in breeding that's been grabbed by not only the US, but South America and China is just phenomenal. And we're just standing on the sidelines. And this is a really important area. as we try to move away from being entirely chemical based to picking up more genetics and more biologicals. And the biologicals also could fall foul of this system as well. I'm not quite sure how they're going to regulate it. But the last thing we want is the opportunity to use things and then find we're waiting for 2, 3, 4 years because of the politics of Europe.
Thanks, Paul. Minette.
What do I think? I don't think we should. It's very easy to have the conversation of business as usual. Europe is going to change more in the next few years than it has changed in our lifetimes. We're already seeing that with the CAP. Ukraine could feed all of Europe very easily. So we're going to see major change in European policy. I'm really delighted that the Irish are going to have the presidency. Jenny touched on them. I mean, if the Portuguese had the presidency, you could kiss goodbye to all of us because they hate us, or they certainly did when I was there. So it's really good news that the Irish have got the presidency. We're going to see massive change in Europe. We've really got to hope that precision breeding, I mean, there is so much that depends on this being, that is the holy grail in all of this, because you will never get a UK government that is focused. We've been talking about this for 10 years now, and we've made no progress, really. So precision breeding is everything. Europe is changing. I think we've got a real opportunity to lead a lot of that. The research that we've got here, we're in a really good place. When Jenny talks about the expertise that we have, I think when I reflect on it, you've got such a huge amount of expertise that is industry expertise, that is the likes of Jenny, that is the likes of Andrew, having that engagement. And then you put government officials in the room and you take these guys out, and that's when the problems arise. Because there isn't clarity of ambition, there isn't the knowledge. And the EU ambassador was over here yesterday, and SBS is going to be problematic. But I tell you what they will do. They will nail this down in such a watertight coffin that it can never emerge again. Because what the EU know now is that Nigel Farage is stamping down the road. And they are never, ever, ever going to go back to this discussion again. So they are going to do a deal that is literally watertight, that can never be opened up again. So we're not out of the politics in all of this yet, because you imagine at the next election, we could go, maybe we stay on the left, maybe we swing massively to the right. But don't think that's going to change the outcome, because my God, then we're going to be in a right old mess as to where we are with all the challenges of Brexit and everything else. So we've got to hope and pray that precision breeding fast tracks. We've got to hope and pray that the Irish stick to their word and stick with us on that, and then we're all okay. But there's a lot that's got to happen in the next couple of years, or we're back into the territory of nobody knows anything, and we could lose market access, and it could be really, really serious.
Ollie.
I'm afraid I must take a more pessimistic view than the other people.
I thought mine was bad enough.
No, I think it's sort of noble, this idea that we with advantages like precision breeding, we could potentially make efficiency gains necessary to compete on a world stage. But I think if you take the long view of agriculture, support is sort of binary. Like, we had the Corn Laws and we were protected, and then we didn't, and then we had a depression until the Second World War, and then we were protected, and now I think we're heading towards being not protected. Like, I mean, Minette's report sort of takes a kind of third way perspective. Would that be fair?
Middle ground. Middle
ground, yeah. If that's fair, you see, my scepticism at this sort of attitude is that it's never really worked in the past, right? Where you had the repeal of the Corn Laws, initially there wasn't really much of an effect because there wasn't the technology to transport stuff to Britain effectively. So they repealed the Corn Laws, and people knew that there was going to be a massive crunch at some point for an influx of stuff we couldn't compete with. But they said, we don't have the virgin land that America have, we don't have the cheap labour of the Russian peasant, but we have steam ploughs. This is not something they have, so we can double down on scientific agriculture, we can become really, really efficient, and it didn't work, right? I'm not sure it's going to work again. I mean, it would be very nice if the sort of things that are in the report were to come into fruition, but I'm very sceptical that with the land holdings that we have in this country, I mean, perhaps this is the sort of change you're discussing, that we have the scale to make use of these technologies to the extent that would be necessary to compete with America and Australia. And I'm not convinced that the government would be prepared to go towards a sort of free market system which has benefits to the consumer, the taxpayer, and if you do something else with land, the economy, but not have all of the benefits of that because they want to protect small farmers. Right? Because in that situation, the small farmers are superfluous. They're not doing anything of any economic value. Some people argue they're not doing anything of any social value. So I think that we're in a lot of trouble if we go down this line. I understand agriculturally things like GM is a good thing, but I think politically it throws us into water that British farming has never survived before in history, and I don't think it will survive it again.
Thanks, Ollie. Luke, I was a bit put out that you suggested that the farming press wasn't adequately challenging what dynamic alignment means for UK winter cropping. It's a really, really difficult subject to get across, of course, but it's not always an easy subject to explain. Are you happy with what you've heard from the panel?
No, it's a really depressing subject. It's just a massive threat to the industry, and I honestly just don't think that farmers are aware that yet another blow is coming their way, and that is the bit that you, the press, are responsible for.
Thank you. I'm going to move it on, but to take a slightly different tack. So we've talked about dynamic alignment. We're not just going to cover politics. We are going to sort of bring it back to the farm level in a moment. But just before we do, there's probably a couple more questions. Greg Dawson.
Thank you. Greg Dawson, based near Edinburgh. So my question is divergence between the nations of the UK on policy issues, including precision breeding, as already covered, but many others like farm support, agri-environment scheme, land ownership issues, and a great many others. Is that an advantage that permits targeted policies that meet local objectives, or a disadvantage that fragments our industry and an increasingly globalised market?
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. So do you get that there? Yeah. So we can make our own policy outside of Europe. We've got 4 countries in the UK, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, all diverging, and as time goes on, diverging even more. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage?
Thank you. And I should add, I'm from a mixed family farm in Fife in Scotland, where Greg is works for the Agronomy company. I think from our side, and obviously we represent all 4 of the UK farming unions, and it goes back to one of the questions about, we're not going to have subsidies and competing with Europe, and it is true for England, but that is not the case for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And I think the divergence that we see within the UK internal market is making some of those challenges even more apparent, particularly when you start talking about margins and profit. From an EU perspective and post-CAP, so the CAP changed in 2023, and I would describe it as the CAP that the UK always wanted. Unfortunately, we'd already left by then. So essentially, it has now changed, and all member states have to submit a national strategic plan where they operate within the same framework, but they can write a more tailored plan to their country or even within regions of their country. So a country like Belgium, for example, has 2 different plans for Flanders and Wallonia. I think before, obviously agriculture was always devolved, but we were within the same framework of the CAP, and that kept things to a certain extent within the UK market in common. Obviously you still had differences with headage payments, or in Northern Ireland at the moment they have a protein crops payment. In Ireland, the protein crops payment is, I think, like €300 per hectare. So, there are options within the CAP, and I would say a big flaw of all the UK governments, the devolved nations pre-Brexit, was we were never overly ambitious with what we did in the CAP. Our IT systems maybe couldn't cope with the changes at times, but there was a lot more opportunity within the CAP system to tailor to things that we needed. We never quite did that or took full advantage of that. And I think post-Brexit, when you don't have the fear of an EU auditor breathing down your neck. Maybe some have been a bit more courageous, and I think Wales is a good example of where you have seen significant change, but they obviously still have a social value payment, essentially a direct payment, because they value keeping people on the land and farming. And so I think how we bring the 4 UK unions together when we talk about a level playing fields, there's no level playing field in the UK, whereas at least in the EU, direct payments keep that to a certain extent, although schemes are different, competitive.
Thank you. Minette, this idea, well, it's not an idea, it's a fact. We can, the 4 UK nations can individually do largely what they want to do. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, England's just doing such an appalling job that it makes the devolved nations look like they're doing an expert job. I mean, we've got to recognise, I think, that defence is going to come first. So we're going to be massively spending on our defence budget. We've then got the NHS. The figures that I was working with on the farm profitability review were, you build in inflation. It was a 2007 budget that we were working with. And we've put so much more in place. So we're expecting much more of our farmers, and we've got much less money to invest in it. So it's not rocket science to work out that it's economically completely illiterate. And then we decide, Michael Gove back in the day was saying, we're going to end it. We're going to stop these wealthy landowners pulling down more money. Well, what is happening? Well, wealthy landowners pulling down more money, only they're not producing any food at all now. So where's all that gone? I mean, it was always bonkers, and it's even more bonkers now than it was in the beginning. So that's why I talk about a fundamental reset. But we've legislated on a lot of this stuff. So we've got to factor that in. But we have to have a new economic model that delivers it. We're not talking about a huge amount of money, actually, in real terms, when you look at the whole country. So it's perfectly possible to do it all. But the road that we're on at the moment is truly stark raving crazy mad. Because wealthy landowners, outfits like the National Trust and others, pulling down large amounts of money for landscape recovery and other things. And we've got to do all of it, and we can do it much better. And as I say, I was really excited at the end for what we could do. But we massively need to turn this shit round. We really, really do. We've got some of the best research here in the UK of anywhere in the world. We've got Agritech that is part of our industrial strategy, and yet the Agritech Centre hasn't got a relationship with any farms. So we need to do it differently, and we need to do it quickly. And then it works. But, Scotland's done a really good job. Wales has done a really good job. And in fairness to the Welsh Government, they have listened, and they have sat down at the table, and they have worked through it. But the big problem in England was when we delinked, and we focused on non-food producing crops. And that is what we've got to change. Because otherwise, more money will keep going into landscape recovery projects. It will make those large landowners, you sell your tech business, buy your nice little estate in Dorset, pull down taxpayers' money to make it all look nice. It's mad.
Minette, thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on that? I'm going to move it on to another question. I can't read my own writing. Is it John Allard or John Alford? John Allard.
Hi, John Allard, independent agronomist from Herefordshire. My question is, how successful or otherwise has SFI been in achieving its environmental objectives?
And the reason that I asked you to ask your question then, John, is because, Minette, you spoke about food production and also large landowners pulling down large pots of money. In your view, has SFI been successful in achieving its environmental objectives? And if we could sort of broaden it out a little bit after that and look where SFI might be going later this year, if as and when it's relaunched.
Well, it's been successful for 50% of the industry for 3 years. So for the 50% that aren't in SFI, it's been disastrous, and they couldn't access it because it closed suddenly. if the payment rates come down, it's not going to be successful. So, you know, the Stratton Parker work that was done for me showed that you've got to have a profit margin of £250 per hectare, a profit margin. So if you're going to achieve that, you've removed BPS completely, then you've got to have an SFI that has profit built into it, because it's built on the income foregone model, whereby you've got to buy everything, you've got to do everything before you get anything back. It's overcomplicated at the moment. There are too many options, but it can be simplified, and you can bring food-producing crops into it. So you can bring pulses in, you can bring protein crops in, you can bring oil seeds in. But it's got to be done, I think, differently. And it's going to have to be funded differently, because we're back to that 2007 budget. We don't have enough financial resource to do it. But that can be done quite easily. And our infrastructure, if you've sat like I have through the infrastructure bill in Parliament, you'll realise that it's all held back by BNG, which is fine, but it's very costly. If you want to buy BNG credits for infrastructure projects, it's very, very expensive. Whereas if you look at the two things, government can give integrity to a scheme. That's really good. The financial sector wants that. Farming can give scale. Scale makes things affordable. So if you have, you know, your cover crops, your herbal lays, those nature-producing crops, those food-producing crops that deliver an environmental benefit, and you open it up to every corporate in the country investing a bit because they need to be compliant with their CSR responsibility at the moment. Financial sector needs it. And then you've got your scope 3s. You can't put all of that on the farmer. You cannot put all of that on the farmer. So if you have everybody investing in this and you make it have integrity, have scale, then you can deliver an SFI that really works. But we can't think that going cold turkey with all of this environmental legislation in place, all of the regulation, all of the challenges on crop protection that we've got now, we think we can put farmers out there with no investment at all, we're going to see a smaller industry.
Could we do a show of hands as to who thinks that the SFI has successfully delivered on its environmental objectives? Who thinks that it has? So not very many. Who thinks it hasn't? So yeah, so the vast majority of people.
But I bet, can you ask them a third question?
Go on.
Are they happy to have nothing? You know, so you've got SFI, which I think everybody in this room has agreed it's not right at the moment. That doesn't mean to say it can't be put right. So if a restructured SFI that delivered what's needed, as opposed to nothing, because you'd be quite a brave person to say, no, we don't want any BPS, we don't want any SFI, we're going to go completely cold turkey out there.
SFI that works, or nothing?
No one's brave enough to say that, you see, so
let's get a microphone over to the gentleman over there, just say who you are, where you're from, and then make your point, I'll ask you a question, and then I'll go to Paul, and then I'll go to Andrew, and then Ollie.
Yeah, Matthew Patterson, East Anglia. A scheme that's only has a duration of 3 years will never meet its environmental targets. It's just not long enough. There has to be longer. If you're going to get anything out of it, 3 years is nothing. Half of my customers are now in their third year. It's too short a time. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Too short a time. So Paul, then Andrew, then Ollie.
So one of the concerns is the level of administration costs that's been siphoned out of the budget that wasn't before. That's hugely frustrating. And it is about how this continues. Your point's completely valid. What's the point of having 3 years of SFI and then it stops? What was the point in having it? We are fortunate to be in it. It does deliver us some benefit. But probably the biggest benefit environmentally I've got on the farm is we switched to no-till, which was our own decision. And from an environmental perspective, that is a win all the way around. And I think it will be commercially as well. But that's down to your individual circumstance.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Andrew?
Yeah, I think firstly, I mean, there's no doubt it's been successful for the 50%, as Minette says, and you know, and probably financially come at a time they need it. But actually, can we do we know is the measure of its success in terms of delivering what it was set out to deliver? And I think the answer to that is no. I think we've probably all got a good idea what the answer to that is, that we don't know what the answer is, but we all suspect it's no. I mean, personally, it's been quite a challenge for us because actually, how's SFI viewed? Perhaps it's not viewed by the majority like a commercial crop and treated in the same manner. It was viewed as a potential payment to support industry and not perhaps given, small seeded pollen and nectar mixes, wild bird food, legume fallow mixes. They all need to be grown in the right way at the right time to be successful and achieve the objectives. They all have challenges when they reach the end of the 3 years, like Matthew says. They all have challenges in the way you manage them. They can all, one of our jobs as an AICC advisor is risk management on behalf of our clients. It's a huge part of the job. Actually, some massive risks in terms of populating blackgrass, in terms of, we have members who are looking at, populations of wireworm exploding. All things like this that were unforeseen, unforeseen potential deficits. So actually, I think it has been quite a challenge, but the cash has been quite welcome. Johan would be my response.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Ollie.
If I may change the question slightly, I don't know if the SFI has been successful environmentally, but I think it has been successful in what I think it was designed to do, which is to end the socialised model of agriculture that we've had in this country since the Second World War. Agriculture after World War II by the Socialist Labour government was socialised alongside all of the other things that we don't have anymore, like the railways, the public utility companies, social housing, all this sort of stuff. The two things we still have in this country are the NHS and just farming still, right? The Conservatives don't want to pay for socialised agriculture, but they don't want to attack it because they think that farmers will vote Tory, right? Which may or may not be true. They don't really want to do it. But so what they did do instead was change the model, right? We're not paying you to farm anymore, we're paying you for nature. But nature, it doesn't really have any direct economic benefit. You can't monetise it in a conventional economic system. So the Labour Party have come in and go, well, this isn't feeding the urban working class, which was the intention of the settlement we had after the Second World War. So then they've wound it down. And now we see Emma Reynolds say, we're going to have a new SFI, but it's going to be for very, very small farmers and new farmers, but not the big guys, right? We're not going to support you. So what has actually happened here is they've withdrawn the support that we've had since the Second World War, and this is essentially Thatcherism. We've seen it with other industries. I think there's some confusion, perhaps because farms, although they have been socialised, have been in private hands rather than state-owned. But it's just offshoring of heavy industry. It's what happened to steel. They're not supporting British production anymore, and they're going to rely on imports. So I think that's what the SFI was designed to do, and it's done it.
Thanks, Ollie. Matthew spoke about 3 years not being long enough for environmental schemes. John Barrett, you've got a question that also involves 3 years.
Yep, thanks, Johan. John Barrett, Chief Agricultural Officer at the AF Group. Are 3-year contract farming agreements fit for purpose in 2026?
So are 3-year contract farming agreements fit for purpose in 2026?
Very good question, John. Very good question. I think probably for the first way I'd throw that back is very much, it depends on what the contract farming agreement is. Myself as an advisor work with several farms that are contractors that have several contract farming agreements. I also work for landlords with contract farming agreements. And there's a vast array in which they are set, the differences in the way they're set up be slightly controversial. There are some contract farming landlords that I view as still very much farmers, and there are some who are perhaps getting towards, you could say that actually what is their involvement of being very controversial, if you know what I mean. So actually, it depends on the contract farming agreement. But actually, I think usually the ones where there's a very, very good relationship between the contract farmer and the landlord, there is an understanding there. I think that actually Scott talked earlier about the very, very high fixed costs. That it's really challenging at the moment. And we tend to say as agronomists that actually variable costs have become fixed to a certain extent. Yeah, you can do little things and tweak them, but fixed costs have become extremely variable. But the only way they're variable is they're only going one way. I have a contract farming landlord, one contract farming, my advisor, he said 4 years ago he could replace his £750,000 combine 4 times over. Now on his land he farms, he can't replace it this year, not generating that much income from contract farming. And that's not profit, that's the income from doing it. So actually it depends on the agreement, John, I think. There is, but I think for the vast majority of them, the pie is only so big. We looked at data this morning, and we've discussed it this afternoon on where we currently are with farm profitability. The pie is only so big, and actually that pie's got to be cut up. And at the moment, it just isn't big enough. But I think it's important for contract farmers and landlords to have that discussion, particularly about fixed costs, to make this sustainable and go forward. I think there's got to be recognition that actually the responsibility, if you want someone there with timeliness to look after your land in a sustainable manner and carry out all the operations you need to do, and perhaps oversee the SFI options as well, then actually no longer is that equal. The contractor has got to receive more, I think, whether that's in a prior charge or a larger percentage of the payment. So, yeah, a lot of work needed down that, I think, John, in answer to your question on a lot of agreements to actually make sure they are sustainable beyond 3 years. Otherwise, we could look at a lot of vacant contract farming agreements and a lot of work for land agents.
Thanks, Andrew. Minette, we need to do things differently?
I think the trouble is that there's so much uncertainty out there now that what I set out to do was a process for the 25-year farming roadmap. And you've all said it with the SFI, the short-term approach. We've got to have a 25-year farming roadmap that is really sort of politically bulletproof. So they might do a bit more of one thing or a bit less of another, but they don't take farmers off. Because the fixed costs, machinery is up nearly 35% from where we were in 2019. And, you made the point, we're talking about fixed costs, but our input costs are also up 30%. These costs are unprecedented in 5 years from where we were. And that's events that have done that. But, it is a really, really costly environment out there. And, we've got some landlords like mine that are putting rents up every 3 years. We've got some that are bringing rents down. We've got so much differentiation out there as to where you all are based. There will be different things going on. And that makes it very, very difficult, I think, to offer advice because there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And that's the challenge. And then you've got all the lack of, one of the most stark facts that I saw was the fact that less people understand the environmental land management scheme now than when it started. And it was less than 10% when it started. So it was 9%, now it's 7%. That is the most shocking indictment. So not only have we got costs going up there, but no one's got a blooming clue what the national plan for anything is. And if we could sort some of that out, it would help a lot. But there's a real danger. Bill, when I got here, everyone said it's been such a brilliant conference. Everyone's so upbeat. And I'm just really worried that we're sort of pulling it down as you're going. So we've got to build everything up, Johan, in the next 10 minutes.
We'll go out with a bang, but in a good way.
Not literally.
Before we do though, Paul, 3-year contract farming agreements.
I would say in today's world of machinery costs and what hasn't been mentioned, the difficulty of getting high quality labour, it isn't long enough. If we're going to do sensible land management where we focus on soil and take the time to improve soil, you can't do it in 3 years. And if you do it in 3 years and then you lose it, what's the incentive? We've seen, I think, the environmental damage that short-term agreements can cause land management. So my plea would be to have a vision for a 10-year period so that it allows both better machinery planning, better labour planning, and better long-term management of soils. What I think it will probably need in those agreements is the flexibility to appreciate the volatility both the land provider and the contractor face. And that'll be the smart bit, because if you get those two elements right and everybody's comfortable, you can flex as the market goes up and down. From a contractor's perspective, the biggest thing is when the market goes down and I've got all these higher purchase payments, how on earth am I going to make them? From a landlord's perspective, they're always wanting to sort of maximise what's out there in the market. But if we're looking at this together sensibly, it should be about long-term soil management. And we are not talking enough about our soil and how we are genuinely, so we all aspire to leave it better, but are we leaving it better? And I've seen too many contracts where there just hasn't been the margin to allow error or to do different things to do that. So I think that should be a fundamental part of this discussion.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yes, just to add, I mean, I think how you spend the money is important and knowing what contracts are available and options are there. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what is the budget. And without a long-term budget agreed and knowing how big the pot is, we really struggle, especially to deliver on a lot of the government's ambitions. And something else that we really lack now is transparency. Pre-Brexit, the UK government would have to report every penny as to how it was spent within schemes. And it's something that the UK government just isn't doing now. And you would get absolutely hammered by the Commission if you spent the amount of money that the UK government has on designing schemes rather than actually paying out on them. And so I think we need that level of transparency from government, and when underspend is there and not being spent, it's shocking.
There's quite an interesting parallel. I mean, the combine that you're looking at there could be costing £1 million now, and to have it on a 3-year contract, it's just absolute madness. If you flip that into the poultry sector, there are those wanting to have the provision of boilers or chickens, where you're putting £1 million into a shed, but they're offering long-term contracts so that it works. And I think we just have to be smarter and bolder as an industry to have that longer-term vision and an open discussion as how all parties can work together.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Andrew, did you want to say anything else? No,
I was just going to add that I 100% agree with Paul there. And actually, I involve one grower who has a long-term potato contract.
Yeah.
And do you know what? He's increasing his potato growing on the same contract. It's not the market high, it's not the market low, but actually it's encouraging him to increase and expand. Yeah. And that's the certainty it's the type of certainty we need, Paul. I absolutely agree.
We're going to do one more question, but before I do, John, is there anything that you want to sort of add or shed some light on?
Just to say that the thought came about by seeing an advert in the Farmers Weekly for Pilgrims for a 20-year contract for pigs, and it was on the back of a big investment, as Paul says, but as the panel have highlighted, the combine and the sprayer, but sat behind you are big investments, and so we need that more long-termism thinking.
Thank you. Thanks, John. I'm going to move to, we've got 10 or 11 minutes left, but let's do our last question, and we'll try and make it a positive. Well, if the question's not positive, I think it is. It is looking to the future, but we'll try and be positive on the panel in answering it. Louise Penn. Just wait for the microphone if you would. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Louise. You thought you got away with not asking you.
Louise Penn, agronomist with Ceres Rural. So my question kind of focuses on the next generation. So we see a lot of focus on kind of new entrants into farming, but farmers' sons and daughters are often overlooked. With farming becoming increasingly challenging, with all the challenges that we've spoken about this afternoon, and requiring, such a huge skill set from kind of business, farm crop management, practical skills, and the constant need to diversify to remain profitable. University is increasingly expensive. What practical support, such as training, courses, or grants, can we put in place to fund education and skills development for future farm successors?
So what practical support can be put in place to fund education and skills development for future farm successors? Ollie, I'm going to ask you. I mean, what would encourage farm successors?
To be honest with you, I think that there's a huge problem in the industry which has been going on for probably centuries now, which is that you have very talented people who want to be farmers and have a genuine desire to do it, who can't because they don't have a farm, and then you have people that I'm sure we will all know who sort of end up with a farm through some circumstance and they're not really into it and they just sort of feel an obligation. And how you shuffle those people around is obviously sort of an age-old question of the countryside, because it's tied up with property rights and all sorts of things. Like it's a very difficult thing to solve. Maybe we'll see as profitable farming is sort of the emphasis of the government as such, but that means essentially industrial, which I use in air quotes for anyone listening. You're going to have sort of companies running stuff like Cranswick, for example. If someone wants to be a farmer and doesn't have a farm, they can get a job at Cranswick. So maybe we will see as farming units get bigger, as smaller people go out of business, and you start to see more intensive poultry and pig, because that's the sort of thing that will be able to compete in the future. There will just be sort of almost urban style positions that the people who are interested in can apply for, and then maybe they could also do degrees and get trained in it, and maybe that's what we'll see. Beyond that, I'm not sure what could be done without some really radical change to sort of landholding and stuff in this country.
Ollie, thank you. Paul?
It's a subject that is really dear to my heart. In industry statistics, I'm only, I think, 5 years over the average working age, but on my farm, I am 37 years over the average age of the workforce. And I am so passionate about the necessity for this industry to properly equip them with the skills and the training they need, and we are not doing it properly at the moment. We have 2 students of 16 at the moment, and the local college is not giving them the certificates and the skills that they need at the beginning that they can then build on. But I genuinely think they have a really exciting future, because they will be in a shortage, and then they will be able to command price and positions if they've got the capabilities. They can also travel the world in a way that past generations couldn't, which I think is really exciting. But the key to this is my generation thinking about them and ensure we enable them to work for the benefit of the industry, to allow them to have work-life balance in a way we maybe haven't done in the past.
Thank you, Paul. Jenny?
Thanks. Yeah, so the 4 UK farming unions are also members of SEJA, which is the European Council of Young Farmers. And in Europe, they are baffled by young farmers' focus and obsession with land ownership in the UK, and that the only way to be a farmer is to be a tenant or an owner. And I think there's much more of an emphasis on professionalising the industry, but also attracting new talent from other industries and showing farming as being a viable sector for anyone to come in working, where it's science and technology. And I think for us, we need to modernise it and show that we are not just a bunch of farmers sitting on our tractors, and that how high tech and how innovative farming can be, and that's how we're going to attract the next generation. But we also need to be more professional and think about things like health and safety and work-life balance, because that is what the next generation expect, and they can find it elsewhere. So if we want to retain that talent, then we're going to have to meet their demands.
Before I go to Andrew and then Minette, I'll give Minette the last word, but what are your thoughts?
I completely agree. I think that we've got, speaking to some of my friends, they've got brothers and sisters who have been to university, they've got a degree, and they're really struggling to find jobs now in different industries. I think especially with kind of AI coming about, that actually practical skills and farming, I think that there's a lot of other industries that are going to see people really struggling for jobs. Yet, we need really skilled, good, clever people who are good at science working in farming. But I think as an industry, it kind of comes back to earlier when we were talking about kind of social media and telling stories. We need farming to be seen as a bit more, of an exciting place for people to work and attract some of those really clever people. And I think that, all these challenges, if we can attract those people, whether they're farmers' sons and daughters staying on the farm rather than, going off into other industries or new entrants, we really need to make farming sound a bit more exciting or a bit sexier, so actually people want to come and work in farming. and then we can, have a better industry that is more profitable, more efficient, and we can compete more with our neighbours.
Louise, thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Louise. It's probably like we'd primed you for that almost, to be honest. I'm going to speak about it from an AICC point of view. And I think there's no doubt, first of all, you've got to get the right people. Absolutely got to get the right people in the industry. But to get the right people, you've got to let them know what it can provide, what the industry can do for you. And I'll use one example in particular. I know a colleague of Louise is agronomist on a certain programme called Clarkson's Farm. All of a sudden, people know what being an agronomist is. They know what being an independent agronomist is and what it involves. So it's actually getting that good, positive PR about what it can do and what it can be is there. I do think we've got a slight issue at the moment, potentially going forward. We've got a great bunch of young people within AICC, but actually they came in probably in round about 2009, 10, 11, when the industry was picked up and buoyant. When we're in 99, 2000, when those people were leaving college, we saw less people come into the industry, I think, because actually the industry was at a lower ebb at that point in time. So actually, as we're trying to keep it on a positive note, I think we've got to be, all about the challenges in the industry at the moment, we've got to be positive that the industry is still positive and create that PR message to bring those right people in. Give them the community to work in, give them the community to interact together, not just on farm, actually bring them to conferences and events like this. We had a fantastic new entrant session within AICC last night. All people had been within AICC, 35 plus, been in AICC under 5 years. They're all meeting each other, they're all engaging. It's absolutely fantastic. And we as an industry, I'm not just speaking as AICC specifically, but we've got to give them that community to come into, make them understand what the job is. They're great, fantastic jobs, whether it's an agronomist or within poultry, pigs, wherever. They're great jobs. Make them aware of it, get the PR up, get the positivity up, and we'll sort it out.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Minette, what practical support can be put in place to fund education and skills development for future farm successes? So not just the recruitment of new entrants, but retaining the youngsters within farming that were born into the industry. I mean, I remember when this was many years ago, when I was at Ag College, it was strange, you'd have farmers' sons and daughters that were born into the sector that didn't want anything to do with it, and it was other people who wanted to come into the industry, I guess people like myself. But there's got to be, as Louise suggests, the right mix. There's room for everybody, but how do we do it?
Well, I guess, the great thing is that you're all living proof of people who've wanted to go out and work in the industry as experts. I think there are different things that are going to happen, Louise. I am really confident that Generation Z effectively is going to change the world that we operate in, because they don't want to work like the likes of me have. My kids think that I'm stark raving bonkers, probably for a multitude of other reasons. But primarily because they don't think that I have the right work-life balance. So they're not going to work like that. And I spoke when I was doing the review to a dairy farmer who's got a waiting list of herdsmen and women because they do 4-hour shifts. He said, we don't expect anybody to work like they used to here. And he said, we've got a waiting list in the local community because, to your point, AI is changing the wider workplace. And it works really well for them because, they've got people in the local community, they do short shifts, they're well paid, delivers everything for everyone in that area. And then I look at where we are with the curriculum and things like STEM learning, and if agriculture were part of STEM learning, so we'd then be incentivising the children of the future to be looking at the opportunities in agronomy, technical research, food, innovation. All of those things are going to need many, many more people in those areas. So the curriculum is one thing. Bringing advice together. My goodness, at the moment here, it sits in so many different places. So, countries where it's working well, Ireland, definitely, what they've done with Chagas, bringing all the technical advice into one place, has been brilliant. If we could get to more of a place like that for the industry. But, I think we've really got to incentivise people that this is an exciting professional industry. That means the industry changing, and that will be then attracting people into what is going to be a different industry. Because this sort of way we have worked to date isn't going to be sustainable for the long term. It's going to be different. And I think the exciting thing is that people of your generation and younger are going to be the ones that change that.
Minette, thank you. A positive note to end on. And, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for this special Farmers Weekly Question Time event here at the 2026 AICC conference. I'd like to think we weren't too downbeat. I think we've had a healthy discussion, some great questions. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't quite get through all of them, but thank you, and some great answers too from our panellists. So Baroness Minette Batters, Ollie Fletcher, Andrew Blasey, Jenny Brunton and Paul Temple. Big round of applause, if you will, for our panel. And that's it for this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event recorded at the AICC conference in Northamptonshire on the 14th of January 2026. Do remember to subscribe to our regular Farmers Weekly podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. For now though, until next time, I'm your host Johan Tasker. Thank you for listening.